Have you ever connected with a book so deeply that you began to feel a unique sense of empathy and connection to its characters? What if you could step into that story? How would that change your reading experience? Since I was a child, I have been in love with the act of losing myself in a great story, and as an adult, I was surprised to find that a well-designed escape room can often evoke many of the same sensations. After some subpar in-person experiences at escape rooms with my family, my true introduction to the joy of escape rooms was with my long-distance partner in digital escape rooms. Since then, I have participated in many chain and indie-developed escape rooms, both in person and online. And through those experiences, I have found that escape rooms are a form of embodied reading and literary catharsis. Embodied reading is a multi-sensory experience that can take on multiple forms, but ultimately the goal of embodied reading is to further a connection between the reader with the text and a deeper understanding of that text. Scholars of embodied cognition have long since held that we can live vicariously through the stories that we read. Maybe you find yourself reading a novel and imagining what you might say in a conversation with the characters. Or maybe when reading a romance, you find yourself swooning at the words on the page. Here's some more examples of embodied reading. So I know of some people who read bardcore music when reading fantasy or medieval literature. Personally, I'm guilty of making the same facial expressions that I see described in a text. So if a character furrows their brows or growls out the last word, I have to do the same thing to see how it feels. But ultimately, like I said, stories have the power to move us to anger, to fear, to laughter, or to tears. But this idea of being moved by a story isn't new. In fact, Aristotle talked about it over 2,000 years ago in his work Poetics. He called it literary catharsis. Catharsis ultimately is being exposed to strong or negative emotions within the context of a work that you're reading. We, as readers, can visit certain emotions or situations in pages and close those pages when we're done. It provides a sense of control to us so that we can access those emotions through reading. But what about escape rooms? Escape rooms, at their core, follow a narrative and allow puzzlers to interact with different clues and solve puzzles leading to their escape. Often faced with a time limit or interacting with props, individuals get to navigate the physical space of a room. But in 2020, something shifted. Digital escape rooms rose in popularity, giving both experienced puzzlers and curious beginners a unique sense of access to the same phenomenon in a new modality. But actually, this modality wasn't new. In fact, it connects back to the early history of escape rooms. The first in-person escape room was held in 2007 in Kyoto, Japan, and it was called the Real Escape Game Event. It was a 5 to 6 person room that was inspired by live-action role-play, point-and-click games, puzzle hunt, interactive theater, and haunted houses. So even in these earliest roots, you can see some of that embodied aspect, that you walk into a haunted house and get to navigate through that bodily, as well as live-action role-play. You yourself are navigating that narrative. As for how this compares to digital escape rooms today, I would say that there's still very similar experiences. You have access to that same experience, but in a different modality. Instead of physically moving your own body through a space, you're often clicking your computer screen with a mouse, or on a handheld console, using joysticks to move an avatar through a space and hitting a button to interact with clues and props. The in-person escape room is often hailed as a classic team-building exercise, but let's consider the fact that the people that you're with directly affect your experience in the room. I have a few stories to share about this and how who's in your crew directly affects your own reception of your experience. So in 2023, I spent a year teaching middle school English, and my coworkers and I often didn't interact in non-professional environments. We often kept to our own little classrooms doing our own thing. But one of the more extroverted teachers had the idea that we should all do a team bonding experience at an escape room. So we went to a Wild West themed room. And one of the teachers that we were with had a background in geography. And one of the earliest clues that we came upon was a train schedule that was of these trains arriving to this depot. And she kept insisting that this train from Kansas could not arrive before a train from Amarillo. And we were all sitting there trying to hear her elaborate on why this may or may not be the case, and considering different philosophies as to why this clue might be included, that the game master actually had to chime in and redirect us to a different task because this was not the point of the puzzle. But I couldn't help but imagine how that scenario might have played out if I was with my siblings or friends, for example. I probably would have claimed seniority and said, we're moving on, instead of spending so much time being polite and listening to why this clue might be relevant. Another example I want to share with you today, I recently had the opportunity to go on a double date to an Edgar Allan Poe themed escape room. This was such an interesting experience. The game master told us that we were entering into Poe's mysteriously haunted study, and we're going to commune with departed spirits and characters from the writing in order to navigate our way to our escape. Some of the people that I was in this room with, myself and another one of my friends, are English graduate students here at TEDxTWU, and we're intimately familiar with Poe's writings, but it was something completely different to step into this world and immerse ourselves in these narratives and the one erected around them. I actually screamed multiple times at jump scares, which is something that I never could have done if I was just sitting silently reading Poe, and couldn't have done if I wasn't so fully immersed in the story. One other example of an escape room experience I had that I'll share with you. My partner has a long history of doing escape rooms with his family. It's something that he grew up doing, and when he told me about this escape room in Denver called the Homicide Hotel, he said it was one of the best that he'd ever done. So I had very high hopes, and I was not disappointed. It's called the Homicide Hotel, and every part of that room, every decoration, every detail existed to immerse me into the narrative of the escape room. So the narrative that was explained to us is that Robert Quinlan, who was a one-time hotel owner turned serial killer, had escaped from prison, but before that, his hotel had been left to go into disarray, and that some aspiring escape room artists had actually capitalized on that media attention by seizing the property and designing a murder-themed escape room within the old hotel. And so Quinlan, who wanted to keep the attention for himself, took the escape room artists hostage using their puzzles against them. And now we, the visitors, had to work together to help that couple out and find our own escape as well. And I actually began to feel a sense of dread building as I was in even just the lobby. So typically when you enter an escape room, you're met with a very standard lobby with maybe some linty chairs and a bored teenage attendant and a very generic hallway with some doors that have laminated signs about what the room might be about. But this was completely different. We stepped in from the snow into a room with dark, ornate wallpaper that was kind of water-stained and had these heavy velvet curtains. We were actually sitting on couches that were pretty nice, but next to us was a bowl of fake fruit that was moldy. And there were dim chandeliers and eerie music playing, and this anxiety kept building and followed me until we entered the room itself, which I don't want to give any spoilers. This was a very well done room, but there was fake blood everywhere, very gory props, and I began to wonder, as I felt fiction and reality blur, if I had maybe unwittingly put myself in the hands of a serial killer. I began to convince myself maybe this is actually real and we put ourselves into danger. Another detail that really helped solidify this immersive experience is that instead of our game master communicating to us through a screen or a walkie-talkie or a speaker, they communicated with us through a vent in the wall in very breathy whispers. So I was just a little bit frightened, but eventually we did escape, of course. But because I had this experience of getting to fully embody that escape room and live out that narrative, I began to have a unique experience of catharsis. I wasn't the only one. We have a mutual friend actually who did this room, who told us a story about it later and said that when he first got there and checked in, his party was asked who in the group could run the fastest. It was a thought that stuck in his mind the whole time that he went through this room. And the second that the door opened, he bolted and left his party behind, right? So escape rooms can bring us access to these fantastical experiences without us ever having to actually endure the trials of being near a serial killer. We can imagine what it's like to go to space or to swashbuckle with pirates without actually needing to have a spaceship or a pirate ship. So I am actually a published writer and a storyteller at heart, and when I began to become very interested in escape rooms, I wondered what it might be like to write my own. So I've actually had I've been able to try my hand at writing digital escape rooms using a platform called Twine. And Twine is well loved by the interactive fiction community. It's often used for writing choose your own adventure stories. But I wanted to share today some of my experience and how that differs from when I'm writing traditional fiction. So in writing a novel, I'll sit down and often think about my plot arc and how I want that to be divided into 3 acts or 20 chapters. I want it to be very clear so that my reader can navigate and understand the flow very well. And I usually want there to be some sort of character development, typically like external as I'm navigating different characters through the story. But when writing escape rooms, I don't want it to be clear. I want it to be a little bit challenging and confusing with loops and swirls through the plot arc. Instead of using dialogue, I'll have to think about different kinds of clues and props and puzzles that I'll want to incorporate into my written text. And actually, Twine uses instead of like paragraphs, their version of a body of text is called a passage, which I think actually has a really unique, multifaceted meaning. Instead of, it can mean, it can refer to a person walking through a passage to get from one room to another, but can also refer to that body of text. And so one unique thing about Twine is that you can code in an inventory. So as your reader moves from one passage to the next, they might add something to their inventory. You can also add password locks that are alphabetical or numerical so that your reader has to pay extra attention to pick up clues along the way. So it's a different kind of reading experience, and it still immerses you because the reader themselves becomes a character in that narrative, and they directly shape the outcome of the narrative based on their interactions with the text. So embodied reading and literary catharsis come to us in different forms based on the modality that we're interacting with. In literature, we experience emotional immersion through text with vivid descriptions and images, but with puzzles and escape rooms, we experience physical immersion. We are actually immersed into the space. It's the difference between reading about a character's journey versus actually living it yourself. In 2019, it was reported that there were 50,000 escape rooms and counting worldwide, and that's a number that's only continued growing as the trend itself grows. So the next time that you find yourself in an escape room, I invite you to immerse yourself in that room. Let yourself be swept away by the narrative. Every escape room invites you not just to solve a story, but to live it, to experience a narrative from the inside out. Thank you.